Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a good time today. Now, listen, I want to make sure everybody pays attention, so I have a little thing that I do for most of the panels that I have, is when I say good afternoon, the proper response is good afternoon, Marty. So I want to make sure you're paying attention, keeps everybody awake, and I guarantee you once we get started in our discussion, you'll be kept awake, but you got to get there first. So let's start it from the top. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Marty.
There we go. Thank you very much. Welcome to Future of Film, from cinema and immersive experiences to VR, AR, and theme parks. The franchise expands. And we're going to talk about all of those various topics, but to kind of set the context for this panel, I want to read the topic description to you. It's short, but it kind of helps set the stage for what we're doing. The film industry has changed significantly in recent years and is experiencing a resurgence on a global level across forms. From significantly improved digital sound systems to the introduction of laser projection systems and on to the creation of more immersive cinema experiences in the form of increased penetration of IMAX and premium large formats of several varieties, there are more and more reasons to get out of the house and journey to the local theater. The introduction of virtual, augmented, and mixed reality into the mix has a lot of potential for both single user and group experiences, but there's a long way to go before there's a significant user base in this market segment. Our distinguished panel, these guys, is uniquely qualified to provide deep insight into the many strategies and tactics to form the basis for content development and release decisions on a global level, and in turn, release schedules, screen technologies, virtual reality, and other related methodologies and technologies as we look to the future. So what I'd like each of the panelists to do, and we're going to start at my far right with Guy Primus, take a moment or two to say who you are, what you do, and how that relates to the topic. Guy, if you would, please.
Guy Primus, co-founder and CEO of the virtual reality company here in Los Angeles. We create extraordinary cinematic VR and AR now experiences, and really all we want to do is just immerse people in content and really not only create empathy and engagement, but really extend people's knowledge of subjects and actually just extend their awareness of their surroundings and make them feel as though they are there in the situation and circumstance.
Okay, to his left, Ted Schulwitz.
I'm Ted. I'm the futurist at 20th Century Fox, and I also have an interesting role at a big movie projector company, the largest one in the world by sort of market share, called Barco, and I handle all the creative aspects of a immersive cinema project called Barco Escape. So I sort of blend these interesting worlds together to try and figure out what the future of entertainment might look like, might feel like, might be our best and most interesting engagement points, both within head-worn media and outside of head-worn media, and lots of other things that are kind of more in the secret lab part of what we do. But essentially, I'm a glorified lab rat, and I experiment with the future in lots of different ways. And one of my colleagues on the panel will tell you a little bit about what we're doing with some interesting augmented stuff as well. So we're dancing a lot of dances.
We've got a good mixture of people here, as you'll continue to find out. Mike Jensen from Deloitte.
Yeah, Mike Jensen from Deloitte Consulting, our strategy practice, where I focus on emerging media, digital media. I have a background, spent 5 years at Legendary Entertainment, where I ran digital for them, which is all about the expansion of big franchise properties into the digital space. And produced a number of independent movies as well too, including a bunch in Sundance, Toronto, a lot of the film festival circuit, and I've been with Deloitte about 2.5 years, where again I focus on media entertainment and really emerging technologies and how that's changing the media and entertainment landscape.
Okay, and to his left, Osterhout Design Group, long for ODG.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris White. I'm part of the strategic management team at ODG, and my specialty is trying to get disruptive technology into sectors that are a little stale or have incumbents that don't want new technology in. And I've done it in multiple industries. Currently, the last, going on 3 years, we're working on the head-worn industry. ODG specifically kind of focuses on three things. We really believe in non-tethered. And so far in this conference, I've listened to a lot of discussions about tethered devices. ODG's differentiator is that non-tethered aspect, and then the cinema quality of our images. We spend a lot of time on our optics, and our R7 product is what's on the market today and what we're getting feedback loop from the enterprise on. And then the last part of ODG, hardware-wise, and I think we're going to get into this, is the aspect of it needs to be comfortable, right? Like, I put on so many different devices, ours included, and there's a spectrum of, yeah, I can do this for 20 minutes. I can do this for 40 minutes. I can do this for 60 minutes. Very rarely can I have an enjoyable experience north of 60. And ODG, we're going to start showing that you can do that in a comfortable standpoint. So I hope we get to talk about that.
Okay, and to his left, Gene Munster, Piper Jaffray.
So I'm an industry analyst, and I cover large public internet companies that are intensely focused on seeing virtual, augmented, and mixed reality becoming the next mega wave. And from our perspective, there's been 2 waves in the past with the internet and mobile, and this wave is going to be as profound. And so not only the private companies and some public here, but our focus is just to really get a better sense of a lot of it's on the public side of the type of investments that they're making and how they view the future.
Okay, thank you. And my name is Marty Schindler. We have the Schindler Perspective, which is a husband and wife consulting team. Our combined credentials include a Big 4 professional service firm, top 5 business school, hands-on experience at 20th Century Fox, MGM, Lucasfilm's Industrial Light and Magic, Kodak Cinesite, and Bank of America. We've worked at literally every point on the horizontal value chain in entertainment and entertainment technology, as well as many of the vertical points, and we work on various business issues. I want to do a quick poll. How many people here are involved in feature films? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. TV? Okay. Theme parks? All right. VR or AR and related businesses? Okay, probably majority. Not, I shouldn't say the majority. Close to the largest part of that. Any other businesses, or just came in here because it's cool and air conditioned?
How about games?
Games? Okay, yeah, games. Good point. All right. We're going to talk first about the allure of cinema because of the multifaceted topic title that we have. There was an interesting article in the MIT Technology Review a few weeks ago about Doug Trumbull's Magi system. His movie's done at 120 frames per second in UHD, in 4K, and it's in 3D. I saw it a few months ago at a studio in Massachusetts, and it was absolutely stunning. Ang Lee's forthcoming Billy Lynn's Longtime Halftime Walk used similar formats for a part of the movie. Certainly knowing his work, I am certain that it was remarkable as well. And I remember Frank telling me after he saw it at the NAB how good it was. Is that right? So I know it's going to be really good, but it's only going to show in 2 theaters. Broadway and 68th, I think, in New York, the AMC, and probably at the ArcLight. So in recent years, IMAX and premium large format regularly garner about 15% of the box office. Due to its sheer size, Barco, as Ted mentioned, has Escape, which I've seen. I've seen the Star Trek movie in Escape, and it was actually quite good, and with the idea that I thought it would get better as the process evolves. So the question really is, would box office and tickets sold stagnant in North America? Box office this year is only up about 3.5%. Average ticket prices down from prior years. Are these concepts with great imagery and compelling sound systems, going to capture people back to the theater, especially since we collectively have such good presentations at home? Are we going to get people back to the theater? Is this going to work? Whoever, Ted,
I'll let
his opinion.
Ted take that one.
That's sort of my wheelhouse, I guess, more a little bit. You're asking sort of the core question of what we swirl around in and mix the chemistry of, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it's all about looking at what is going to compel an audience to do what you just said. when they have so many choices at home, and those choices are fragmenting, segmenting, and increasing in quality all at the same time, and there's so many interesting things to do without getting out of the house, how do you compel an audience to say, this is what I want to do? And you also have to kind of put a pretty big weighting structure on it, because it's not just the price of the entertainment itself. It's the price of the transportation to get there. It's the price of the babysitter if you have kids. It's the price of the food and drink, and it's a night out, right? So there's some interesting statistics on how many, at least in the U.S., how many times people go to the movies a year now. And for a core audience, it's like less than 5-6 times a year, right? So it's once every couple of months you make a trip to the movies. And that's different from generations past, where movies was your weekly entertainment output. Or if you go to a place like India, where I spent a lot of time in, it's so culturally permeated, the movie business, that people literally go to the movies almost every day, which is why they make thousands of movies a year, because their audience is there and their audience desire is there. As audiences continue to get more sophisticated and their home environments get more sophisticated, the trick for us is, how do you create what I call sort of a theme park level experience without having to go to a theme park, without having to spend not just $100, $150 for an evening, but the thousands of dollars to travel to a theme park and then spend a day or a few days with your family there? Can you create that level of excitement, enticement, and immersion inside a movie theater that's a multiplex, that's many multiplexes around the planet, that says on every Friday night, on a Sunday morning with the kids, I want to go do this. I'd rather take them out someplace and engage with them in a more connected way than letting them be upstairs on the iPad or the Xbox or the PlayStation. And with VR starting to hit, so I live this interesting sort of bifurcated world, right, where I play on both sides of this equation, and you can create a virtual cinematic experience or a virtual super high intensity experience. That challenge of moving out of the home gets even more daunting. So you see a lot of companies like IMAX is now starting to experiment, and I think they're really smart to dive in first without really knowing the answers and say, we're going to take on the idea of using head-mounted displays in a location-based environment and see if we can increase our palette that way a little bit, without worrying too much about the obvious challenges of throughput and costing and technology and so forth and so on. It's good on them for just throwing down. And on the Fox side, that's kind of what we're doing too. We throw down without really thinking about all the answers, which is
So the question
smart.
really is, though, will Barco escape, or the format that Ang Lee and Doug Trumbull have and others get people back to the theater?
Well, I think technology is part of the answer, but content and craftsmanship is the other part of the answer. And what is engaging the audience and what becomes their event, their must-see thing. So when we did Star Trek, working with Justin Lin and J.J. Abrams, they were super enthused about expanding the palette of cinema, right? And also knowing that they still have their addressable market they have to deal with. They have a 2,500 theater release that they have to deal with, and here's 30 theaters that are these new experimental, like, let's try this too. So there's a weighing of resources and time and money, but they also want to explore and experiment because they know they can't stand in place. What I always like to say is, if you're just staying in the same place, you're just going to get run over.
Yeah, I
Someone's
think
gonna run
the
over.
experimentation nature of what Ted is suggesting is, a way that we can get to the answer to your question, because right now no one is sure what it's going to look like, but we're pretty sure that by engaging more than just two of your senses in a way that's more immersive and more meaningful than you can get at your home is the path forward. And so I think what Barco is doing, again, most people are not going to invest in a 3-sided theater. They're just not going to do that. What HMDs are doing, what D-Box is doing with motion control chairs, that stuff is very expensive, just like steel and concrete was to build a traditional theater. But now you can have that level with a 100 screen or 100-inch screen at home. It's very doable for many Americans, and I think we just have to continue to push past that, and the experimentation is what's necessary.
Gene?
So don't know the movie industry, just purely on the technology side, is that the hardware is going to get exponentially better, and it's pretty clumsy today. And I'm at the risk of being naive in terms of how the world's worked, but from our perspective is that this experience that people are going to be able to have in their home is going to be powerful. It will be untethered, like we talked about. The content today is weak, but it will get better. And I think that there is a place for these kind of virtual theme parks, like the Void's doing, but I just think a traditional theater, I struggle with how that fits in the future.
Could I add one thing?
Well, you can add two things even.
I'll take you on that.
Okay.
So for me, when I was growing up, I remember my parents had movie night. So I've had my first little girl 2 years ago, and my wife and I were Marines. We're very on time. My family, not so much. So Christmas time, last Christmas, you guys all probably did it, Star Wars, right? So we all wanted to go as a family to Star Wars. So the first question was, who's going to take care of Penelope? My mom took and then it was, okay, can I get the whole family in the car to get to Star Wars? We tried twice, and the movie theater was sold out both times. Did not see Star Wars. So when you talk about flat line and whatnot, if I had the ability, instead of when you talk about in home or in theater, if I had the ability to watch that release wherever I was, on demand, we would have done it, and we would have done it in a social aspect. But there was the practicality that has changed, and then the second part to the world we live in today, the Netflix on demand, is the marginal benefit of going to the theater for the masses is not worth what my parents did when I was a little kid. They're like, well, and I watch it with my wife and I. We could do that, but man, it's such a production. And I think what you sit down in growth, you're just seeing that happen at a macro scale.
Well, I'm talking, these are North American box office that I'm talking about, not global box office, because global box office has increased, China in particular, but the Asia region is a very strong number two, and the rate of increase, especially since it was starting from a smaller base, the rate is even higher.
Fully agree, and I think my question to the panel and the audience would be, is the North American market the canary in the coal mine? Because it very well could be, because of the realities that the marginal benefit isn't there.
Well, people have to make that decision, but you mentioned Netflix and being able to watch it on demand. Netflix is very much into feature films, not just TV product, very much into feature films, and they recently announced a deal with iPic Theaters, which are high-end theaters started by a guy named Hamid Hashemi, who ran Movieco Theaters and really set up the current genre, if you will, the current era of upscale facilities, upscale food, upscale seating. So he has a deal with them for day and date release. It'll be still to be determined, because I don't think any new releases from Netflix have hit that theater yet, but it's going to be to be determined how well it's going to do. Will people pay the upcharge of, let's say, $20 for a high-end seat, which is under normal conditions? Will they pay that for a Netflix movie? Although Netflix, from a production value point of view, is a feature film from any of the studios, no question about that.
I think one of the key things is to view this as a continuum. So we talked about a theme park experience, and those things are very, very expensive. You're talking about $1,000 for a family to go to a theme park experience. And so if you can do something between that and Netflix on a really large screen TV, there's a chance that you can win. And again, I think it really is just a matter of defining what that sweet spot is for the required investment, like Ted suggested. Someone's going to have to invest in the content. Someone's going to have to invest in the pods that show these things. We're going to have to invest in the AV, the haptics. Someone is going to make that investment. And I think that's I don't know if it's so much as the theaters kind of being. I don't think they can stay static. I agree with Gene that model may be going the way of the dinosaur, but I think it evolving that model and the location based, because people still want to get out of the house. I mean, it's critical. I mean,
yeah.
it's a Sunday afternoon thing, like, again, to get my son off of the iPad to go and to the park or to the movie theater, whatever it is, it's critical, and especially in this day and age. And so I think we just have to define, where on that continuum the sweet spot is.
Let's do a quick poll. How many people have been to the movies in the last week? Bought a ticket at a cinema?
So that's
Okay.
a pretty clear indicator, right?
Yeah.
Some of
How
the
about
challenges.
the last month? Let's put it that way. It's not bad.
By a sample, though, I would argue.
There's also a
I would agree
seasonality
with that.
factor, if we want to get technical. There are not too many. We missed the summer
You're
box
used to
office.
putting an asterisk under things and saying not a statistically valid sample. Thank you.
Who in the last week has watched Netflix or Amazon Prime movie?
Yeah. So
So that goes with it. So let's talk about maybe the formats for the theater before we move on to a couple of other things. HD made a big inroads to the theater point of view. The theaters just went through a whole digital cinema renovation in the last 10, 12 years, starting 2005, 2006, driven by 3D. So they're just paying off some of that equipment. Are they going to do that? From an acquisition point of view, something Ted's been very much involved in. 4K acquisition is what film basically was when I worked at Kodak many years ago. Piece of film, celluloid, 4K, if you got all the information off it. 6K is used an awful lot now. 8K pretty soon.
Happening
Red
right now.
has an 8K
Yeah,
camera
it's happening
now.
right now. Yeah.
So is that something
Red
that
and
could
Arri
make
and
a
others are
difference?
doing high resolution tool sets, and that digital revolution has happened. By and large, the cinema chains are very happy with their ROI of digital equipment and digital deliverables, and the PLF fees and all the different fee structures. The major chains are successful, but trying to find different levels of success, right? Trying to find different ways to actually engage their audiences, to get half months in the summertime when they're going to do their big tentpole releases. Theaters are a real estate challenge, right? They're essentially empty almost 90% of the time. So it's a lot of real estate that's sitting there doing nothing a lot of the time. And for us, part of that creative chemistry is, what do you do with that real estate? What do you do with it? It's sitting there, and can you rejigger some of that and rethink about what does entertainment mean? What can it mean to an audience? So for me, I'm sort of the guy that always sort of starts with more questions than answers, and likes to live on that side of the equation, likes to kind of work through the unknown with people. So that's exhibitors, that's technology folks, that's movie studios. That's what we've been doing, and successful so far.
So acquiring at a higher frame rate, a higher resolution,
Yeah, I mean, that's all part and parcel to just technology moving forward.
future-proof?
Yeah, but it doesn't really answer the question of what makes it extraordinarily entertaining, right? And I think that technology always takes a second seat to what I say is always craftsmanship. If you're going to craft something that means something, technology is only part of that equation. It's not the leading force of that equation. So as we drive sort of the Barco side of this, we know that the most important part of this is working with filmmakers at the top level to create really engaging content in that format. So the next thing that's coming out, so the Star Trek, a little bit of the history of that, 30 theaters, about a little over 22, 23 minutes of the movie is in this immersive format where the theater comes to life around you, and it's 3 screens instead of 1 screen. So it gets that theme park-esque kind of feeling. We worked with Prime Focus and DNEG on the actual VFX. So the same companies that did the VFX for the movie created this ancillary content. So it's a different kind of movie. The next movie that comes out is by a gentleman named Scott Waz, the director of Need for Speed and Act of Valor, and he shot the entire movie in this format. It's called Six Below. It's an action-adventure, sort of snowboard, real-life adventure movie. And it's remarkable to see it in this format that is ultra-wide and all around you, and it's often referred to, and Guy and I have talked about this, as bricks-and-mortar VR, right? As audience appetite for immersive entertainment is starting to get into their lexicon and get into their understanding that they're actually interested in more than this. They look at this all day at work. They look at this at home. So what they're really interested in is looking at this when they can spend more money and be more engaged in it.
Which
So
is
we're
why
trying to figure that
IMAX and premium large format
Is a
have
big part
done
of them.
so well,
Right.
especially on opening weekends and especially in 3D. They're driving the 3D industry.
Mm-hmm.
The movie you're referring to, the next movie, is that 2D?
It's 2D, yeah. So the interesting thing about the Escape format is it's primarily and may forever be a 2D format. There is a lot of discussion about 3D, but so far there hasn't been interest in past discussion because a lot of theaters, a lot of theater goers are looking for an immersive alternative to 3D.
Yeah.
That is a different style of immersive entertainment.
So the auditorium that I saw Star Trek in Escape now has D-Box,
Mm-hmm.
or coming soon D-Box. It's probably there by now. Does everyone know what D-Box is about?
Motion seats that move.
Motion seats, individual seats, a little bit of preparation for the movie. I think you've been doing some
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
VR
it.
stuff in that too. But nevertheless, it's going to be interesting to see if people get to the theater. I mean, the Metropolitan Opera on Saturday morning has done exceedingly well. You'd be surprised if you knew what the box office was because there's unused time at the theater.
And,
All right,
and
so-
Marty, I just want to
Sure.
just to touch on that for a second. I think the one thing that Ted alluded to here as well too is the side of the content creation side, which is in the overall landscape of whether or not people are going to go through to the theaters or not. It comes down to the content creators themselves, and for the most part, studios as well too, is putting aside Netflix and Amazon and the big digital players, but those creators, whether directors, producers, their ability to adapt the content and create content specifically for these mediums will ultimately then be able to drive people outside of the theaters into these experiences. And as that becomes more credible, and as the creators become more familiar with the formats and start to create specifically for those formats, whether it's VR, AR, or some motion seats, those types of things, to me that's the necessary step in the equation to ultimately moving the needle into real measurable direction.
But it's a chicken and egg. I agree wholeheartedly. It's a chicken and egg conversation, because in order for a content creator to create really great content, there has to be more than kind of just a handful of destinations. And so I think the people that own those destinations have to invest as well. And that's what you're seeing a lot with hardware manufacturers investing in VR content. You've seen it with Samsung, you've seen it with Sony, you've seen it with Oculus, and so the same thing is going to have to happen in the bricks and mortar space.
Let's move on a little bit. Part of the definition is VR and AR and mixed reality. Terms and acronyms that get thrown around a lot. What is the level of understanding in the broader consumer marketplace of those terms? People in this room mostly know what those terms mean. We could probably call on anybody here and ask them to give a definition. They'd probably be reasonable. That's why they're here. But our collective businesses require that the consumer market, and after that, the professional or enterprise market, be aware of it as well. So what do you guys think the level of understanding of what those terms mean is? Let's talk first in the consumer marketplace. Go ahead, Gene.
Virtual reality, consumers know what that is. Just based on our survey work, I would say that 70% of people probably have some concept of what virtual reality is. Augmented reality, it dips down to people who just think of Pokemon. There's 500 million downloads over the first few months, which is unprecedented, but that's the general concept, which is pretty limited. And I would guess that maybe 1 in 10 people could understand, or maybe 1 in 20. And when you get to mixed reality, it's about 1 in 10,000. I sometimes even struggle with explaining it to people. So I think we've scratched the surface on the virtual reality part, and I think most people also view it as still pretty geeky, and there's still a debate that whether any of this stuff is real or it's just going to go the way of 3D. I'm strongly in the camp that this is an undeniable paradigm shift, but to give you some perspective about what the average person thinks is they struggle with.
Well, they're the ones who are going to pay for it ultimately.
It's an evolving definition. I think what Gene is suggesting is absolutely right. People know what VR is today, but that's not what VR is going to be tomorrow. And I think the evidence that we have is that by virtue of us creating content, the people that were able to raise the initial rounds of money were doing 360 video. And now that almost is it's passé. If you don't have some level of interactivity, if you can't use your hands in some way, is that really virtually real? I don't think it really holds water. And so I think we sat with a company yesterday is doing phenomenal haptics work. I mean, it was I didn't expect to see what I saw yesterday. And I know Ted is scheduled to meet with them hopefully in the coming days. And it's almost mind-blowing and understanding that can be added to the sight and sound and the motion. It's going to move the ball continuously down the field.
Well, that's a concept that I have about 6 subjects down on my list, where various things like haptic technology, voice recognition, and the like, gesture control. So why don't we just talk about it now since you brought it up? Is that going to have an impact? Is that going to make it less than, so it's not a sit-back, passive experience? It really will be? And is it going to be beyond what the average gamer wants? It's got to go beyond gamers if it's going to hit a broad consumer marketplace.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, we talked about this last night in the dinner talk too, is that the minute that you move out of a gamepad gamer segmented world into something where you actually bring your own natural body into the experience, you immediately widen the audience. because now mom and dad can do it and grandma can do it, and you can put people into an experience and say, all you have to do is do what you would really do if this was happening to you. So I often give the reference point of the Wii, the Nintendo Wii, which is, if you think about it, it's the first real mass market virtual reality is the Nintendo Wii. Now, you didn't wear it, and it wasn't fully sucking you in, you still looked at a screen, but all you had to do was know that people got so into playing tennis in their living room that they had to develop a safety strap, because people would literally wing the controller into their TVs and break their TVs. And that was virtual reality. So it was no longer a controller, it was a physical part of your body. You felt like you were holding a tennis racket, and you could let grandma bowl in the living room, right? Because she was too old to go to the bowling. So that's kind of the beginning core understanding of why the power of virtual reality is starting to become something so valuable, is when you take that simulation type understanding, and this is part of your theme park sort of discussion, Marty, as well, and ratchet it up like 1,000 notches from what a Nintendo Wii was, and you start to put yourself into haptic situations and more refined hand controllers that the Vive and the Oculus have now, and with one more like quarter of a generation, not even that much more technology evolution, you're not going to have anything. You're just going to, the sensors will be so aware and so smart, the cameras will be so smart that they will just track your hand. So if you wanted to throw a ball, you would have the illusion of a ball and you would throw it. One of the most, I would say, intense and embarrassing moments I've had at Oculus, I spent a lot of time up there at the Facebook campus with those guys, was seeing the early demonstrations and cut pieces of their, what they call now VR Sports. And it wasn't called VR Sports when we first started, it was just these experiments of, so if you've played, I presume a lot of you have played Madden or NBA 2K on a console game, and you know how fun that is. Imagine if that kind of stuff actually came to life. Like you could hike the ball and you felt it happening to you, and you're just using these controllers that are pretty nimble, but eventually those will go away as well. You spot the ball, you see your receiver, you throw, the rushers are coming at you, the whole world turns, you then become the receiver, you have to catch the ball, Odell style. I was like a 5-year-old in their offices with all these engineers just laughing at me for 45 minutes watching me do this. And this is part of what I get to do for a living, is, you know, goof around and have fun like that at the earliest part of the curve. So there's all this kind of stuff that makes the idea of an interactive experience more naturalistic and less segmented into that game audience.
And haptics doesn't necessarily mean active. You can have passive haptics that, you know, will make you respond just because something is crawling on you, or you feel hot, or you feel cold. And so, you know, it actually adds to the story, and it doesn't have to be a game type experience, as Ted is, you know.
And these are theme park tricks. I mean, theme parks have been doing this for a number of generations now, using this, you know, what we call 4D or 5D type simulation senses. But now technology allows us to bring some of that into the home, and as more technology waves happen and we cross the chasm from this early adopter stage where we're at now into real consumer adoption, the first sort of big notch of that, as a lot of you know, is the PlayStation VR shipped in mass, right? So it's coming to people's homes now in very large numbers, and will continue to grow. And
well, they just started shipping about a week ago.
Yeah.
So we talked about the consumer side of it. What about the enterprise side of it? I know you're very much involved on the enterprise side. Is there a level of awareness there? Are people beginning to look into how they're going to use the technology in the enterprise?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So
that's lowercase e on enterprise, by the way.
Yep. We are at an Andy Grove and strategic inflection point, I believe, right? I get out of bed every day to implement it. And it's interesting, so I'm going to maybe take the other side of the trade of what you've heard so far, maybe at this entire conference. And when I hear people say, oh, are you AR or VR? What comes into my head is that's like saying, are you Excel or PowerPoint? I don't know how to respond to that entirely. I think that what the question is, right, is we've started to, with the early stage that we are in the sector, try to describe. So I think be careful that there's a lot of marketing speak trying to say this is what AR is, this is what VR is, this is what mixed reality is, this is what merged reality is. They're trying to brand it to a company, and I would argue to the marketplace, push away from that and think about the strategic inflection point that's happening. You're getting personalized technology that's getting more tailored to you with the on-demand trend that we're seeing, in a manner that we don't have to talk about, are you 720p, 1080p, 4K, 8K? How about as much as the human being can consume? How about that? We want that one, and I want it not in my living room or not in a movie theater. I want it wherever I am in the world, if that's fly fishing on Jackson Hole Snake River or in my living room, right? I want to be able to choose where I consume. I don't want someone else to. And so I give that lead in to your enterprise question, in that working with a lot of the enterprises, they are asking that same question of just how to wrap their head around the technology. And so what I think you see in 2017 and 2018 is very similar to what you saw with BlackBerry, when everyone had that BlackBerry of that email at their work, right? And you saw the one rich lawyer have it or that one exec have it, and then it was, well, why can't everyone have that? You're gonna start to see that same trickle down with these capabilities of AR, VR, and then interacting, and as all the other ecosystem comes in. Because, right, I'm gonna need sensors to know where my place is. I'm gonna have to have the device that I have know where my hands are, and all of those problems that, as the chicken and egg question, which we always talk about, it's been answered. ODG's answered it, a lot of the other hardware, it's there. Content is now being created. You just gotta give time for the flywheel to catch up. And that's what you're going to see here in the next 24 months. Enterprise will lead the way on that flywheel, and they're gonna train the consumer in the workspace the same way BlackBerry's trained them for what everyone's sitting looking in the crowd right now doing.
So what's it going to take to get traction in each of those two marketplaces? I do mean the word each.
Well, what might be valuable is to take a step back, and if you look at this kind of common logic, and I've talked about this a lot too, is the understanding, this kind of global understanding of why AR will actually have much more market traction over time than VR is actually pretty simple. Is that an AR device can easily be a VR device, but a VR HMD today is very difficult to accomplish AR with, except using an outbound camera, which isn't really AR. So an AR device is a multi-purpose device. It can be AR and VR, and all you're doing is occluding the outside world. You're just darkening the shade that lives in front of the technology. When you're wearing a box on your face, which is a VR headset today, it's hard to make that an AR device. So it, by its nature, becomes a more segmented, more custom, more sort of fits into one genre or one niche of a style of entertainment, whereas AR is more flexible. So when you hear folks from Apple talking about why AR is going to be bigger than VR, when any investment analyst looks at AR and says it's going to be an order of magnitude bigger than VR, it just simply means that it accomplishes both. It's the ham and the eggs. It's not just one or the other, and that's why it's going to ultimately be more successful, is the device itself is more flexible.
But I won't disagree, but what is it going to take to get the traction in those markets? And it looks like Mike's got a comment
Sure.
on that one. You're leaning forward here.
I was, yeah. No, I think I think this is exactly right in terms of certainly the market size, and when you look at the potential for AR being much more of a growth market, from a big opportunity dollar standpoint. But similar to how 360 video was the entry point for people to have somewhat of an immersive, interactive experience by being able to move the video around. I think that's the path that VR allows the lead-in into your AR opportunities. That being said, on the enterprise point of view, AR is the entry point in the enterprise point of view, because there's much more cost-saving opportunities for businesses to employ an AR technology. I mean, think about manufacturing, or think about repair. Imagine a repairman being on the side of a road, repairing an automobile and not having the expertise, but instead of hauling that car off into, a warehouse, they can put on their glasses and get instruction or be instructed on how to fix that whatever the issue might be. So it's a long path, I think, towards, consumer adoption, and enterprise is going to be a big point of making that happen early on.
How many years out do you think that's going to be? I mean, Sony just shipped this week. Oculus has not shipped anything in any quantities. Are we looking at any kind of meaningful growth until 2018, 2019?
Well, Oculus, in their partnership with Samsung, has shipped in considerable quantities, in the millions, and their tethered headset, both on the Vive and the Oculus, are considered very successful from an early adopter standpoint. Actually massively successful, overreaching their estimates and their expectations, so that's good. In terms of your question on when do we get to the next level? Again, going back to what AR means and what ODG is doing and what Magic Leap is doing and a few other companies, Meta is doing and a couple other companies in the space, is when you start to understand what the capabilities of AR are, well out of entertainment and just having fun with the device, it's head-worn computing. So if you look at this audience dynamic right now, you guys are kind of 3/4 listening to us, and a good portion of you, because it's part of your workday, are staring down a little piece of silicon like this, and you're tapping on it like this. Some of you are working on a bigger version, which is a laptop, and you're tapping on it. And so that's what you're doing, right? That's the reality of what life is. So if you put your future glasses on and imagine a day when these devices get so nimble and so logical to wear and bring along with you that you would never ever carry your laptop anymore. It just wouldn't make any sense. It's like, yeah, it weighs like 2.5 pounds and I have to put it in a bag. That's ridiculous, right? Now, we could argue go back a generation with the very first laptops, right? So this is part of what I do, is to sort of think about the past and the future and how they converge. But I can see a day pretty clearly, and it won't be, I don't think, that far away, when you will look out at an audience and they'll all be in a business type conference like this, using some sort of head-worn device. It'll probably look sort of like glasses, and eventually it'll really look like glasses. Whereas instead of leaning down and doing this, you'll get your messages, you'll still be more engaged in the world that's living with you, and you'll be able to do things and look at things and type in the air and do all that stuff. And that's not just my view, that's a pretty broad and far-reaching view. And a couple weeks ago at the Oculus conference, when you saw Zuckerberg and his whole team talk about their future, right? They're very invested in the box on the face now. But they are very, very clear and very open about the fact that they are evolving into VR, AR type dynamics. They didn't give any specifics yet, of course, but they were very open about the fact that we're already in sort of a pastist mode with this, and we're going to evolve into a much more nimble future sort of form factor that will allow next-gen computing and next-gen sort of use case, next-gen operating system. So that's the thesis that Magic Leap is working on. That's the thesis that ODG is working on. Now, Facebook talking very publicly about what they're working on that. That has a strong amount of clarity to it.
But without compelling experiences and narratives and stories, it's a clever parlor trick. And that's, so I think, to answer your question, until, like Fox continues to invest and Disney continues to invest, and, we as an emerging VR, AR studio, we actually have to put out great content in order for any of this to work, or else it just kind of sits there and collects dust.
Well, Gene, in his opening remarks, when you were talking about who you are, made a comment about the level of quality of content, and you were less than complimentary about it. So is that what it's going to be? I mean, I hear people say all the time, we're going to be the next Pixar. Well, getting to that point is a lot more difficult than most people think. So what, Gene, you want to maybe a little bit more what you see coming forward in content? Anybody else who wants to chime in after that, please?
One of the limiting factors right now is cost. So we survey people with the 3 versions of Oculus that have been out, and also with HoloLens. And more recently, in the last month, we've probably talked to 200 different kind of interviews with people about HoloLens. And we play a game called RoboRaid, which basically is these robots come out of the wall and you shoot them with some gestures. It's pretty fun. The typical response from people before they put it on is, I've tried VR and I don't know if I'm that excited about this. Then they get playing the game and they generally love it. And then we ask, how much did you pay for this? And the average is about $200, and right now HoloLens costs $3,000. And people's typical response is, no thanks. So I think that I think this cost issue around some of the computer vision is still a major headwind in terms of getting adoption, and obviously that's going to come down.
Like every electronic
thing,
gadget.
yeah.
Go ahead.
ODG is working to bend that cost curve. So I wish I could tell you, but I'd say look at our booth at CES. It's going to answer a lot of your question on when, back to the chicken and egg, hardware versus software. But let's take a moment on the software side, the content side specifically, because of who's in this room. It needs to be easy to make content for these devices. And so when I talk to content creators, they try and tell me, I want to be multi-platform and it works everywhere. And that's great, but the problem is right now the ecosystems that support the head-worn devote resources to each one of those. ODG, we chose to be Android-based because it was the largest operating system and very easy. If you can make Android content to tablet, it's lift and shift and minimal optimization into our platform. I think as the market as a whole starts to realize walled gardens not great, open, nimble platforms good, that's where you'll see more and more of the content creation happen, and then monetization build upon the models that we see in the cell phone, tablet arena, moving to the wearable arena.
Yeah, and it's a matter too of, content right now for the most part that's in the traditional VR space is funded either by brands or it's funded by some sort of marketing advertising ploy. So, whether it's the studios that, are currently experimenting and willing to do things in the marketplace, they're not doing it from an investment standpoint. They're doing it because brands are willing to pay for those experiences. And what needs to happen is as the costs certainly go down for creating and the tools become more readily available and more ubiquitous, and those costs continue to go down, the brand dollars will presumably go away and move on to whatever the next new attractive thing is. And there needs to that kind of inflection point needs to happen in a way where the marketplace is monetizable and you can sustain spending millions of dollars on content and being able to generate rewards from that.
So is there going to be a time when there's going to be something akin to like when Toy Story hit the market? It's an analogy that Guy uses regularly. Toy Story woke everybody up to computer animation. It took what people already saw in Star Wars and other visual effects laid in movies up several notches. So is that piece of content, wherever it is out there in the marketplace, going to hit at a point in time when the pricing of all the various headsets and the form factor and everything else, they're all going to kind of converge around the same time? Is that what's going to help drive some of that?
Absolutely, and I think it's also important to know that just because something is doable, now almost anyone can do a CG film, but they still can't hit Pixar's level of quality. Very few studios can hit that
Or
level.
story.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I think that's really, critical because it's not just about the technology. It's really about putting it in hands of people that know how to tell stories and that have great stories to tell. And so, yes, there are people out there that are making, CG, VR experiences and interactive experiences and, 360, 3D video and 6 degrees of freedom and all the buzzwords that you can throw around. But until you get that into the hands of people that know how to tell stories, it's not going to move the market forward.
Well, I would say that we are setting the stage and have been setting the stage for that for a couple of years now, actually, in kind of these microsphere kind of early adopter understandings that there are already what we would consider a number of really interesting reference pieces of content that have been created in various levels of sophistication that are proving out to small viral audiences that lock in, right? So there's a group we worked with early on named Felix and Paul, and they've created some of the really most compelling, interesting reference pieces of content at the highest levels of 360 look around video. Guy's company and I worked on this piece called the Martian VR Project, which has become a reference piece of content for people that have lived in this world. And our friends at Epic Games, which is the Unreal Engine folks, have created a couple of pieces I would call absolute reference content for everybody that sort of gets one of these headsets, involved in the business in some fashion. There's a project they did called Bullet Train last year, which really showed the capabilities of what could come. And this year they just released something called Robo Recall that is starting to scratch the surface on what we would call the first attempt at a AAA level game / interactive experience in VR. And those are just a few examples. I could give you a number of others that people are talking about all the time. Google has an initiative called Spotlight Stories, and one of the pieces of content that comes up over and over again, it's one of my favorite pieces of content as well as many others that I talked to, is a piece called Pearl, which is an Academy Award-winning director's work that is an interactive story. It's not a game. The Martian is not a game, it's an interactive story. So it broadens the audience, and it goes back to that sort of we dynamic of how do you broaden the audience. So I would say that that's not something that is going to come out of the blue. It's going to come from this continued tracking on building to the market as the market demands more.
Yep.
And I don't know how much you can mention about your new projects, but you're also working on
not much.
a pretty significant project that
Right.
will has a pretty good shot of becoming a reference piece of content.
Yeah, and the other thing that we're doing is not just, we don't want to release one piece of content and then walk away. We're trying to create franchises because, we need people to pick the headsets up again and again and again. And so, the entire platform that we're building, all the content will be interconnected, and there will be a reason for you to watch, multiple episodes, just like, can't wait for Bosch to come out. I mean, we keep making the Netflix and Amazon references. I'm looking forward to the next season of Bosch because, it's important for me to see that, season 3.
Okay, Chris?
One
You have
major,
something too?
one major theme, and I think Gene's example of the $200 versus $3,000 price point that we at ODG talk a lot about is the need to manage expectations here, right? So don't mistake vision with excitement. And we really want to underpromise and overdeliver. So trying to say, when is this going to break out or hit certain revenue numbers, that's too soon, right? You just want to see the incremental so that when users put it on their head, their expectations were managed properly and it'll be a better experience. I know, at least I have. I watched a lot of these promotional videos and I'm like, oh my God, I want to go get that. And then I put it on, I'm like, okay, so that was a lot of arts and crafts. Will disproportionately determine if we're at Lawnmower Man again, AKA where we were in the 90s, or are we actually at the inflection point that I believe we're at?
Gene?
It's worth mentioning that there's going to be a step in between. I believe in the nirvana of wearables, but there's probably your phone is going to be your AR device for the next 5 years. Apple's talked more about it recently. They can do some depth mapping with their current camera. I bet that the next iPhone that they're calling iPhone 10 is going to have AR as one of the key selling points. I think when they get up and announce the phone, they're going to have some applications developed for that and try to make that a selling point. It's not worth spending a ton of time on just because I think that this wearable theme is much more exciting longer term, but it's worth noting that we got to do a step in between.
I think it's worth talking for a second about when you talk about this kind of mythical $200 price point. I actually think it's much higher than that will get to mass consumer adoption, and the reference point I'll make is right here on the desk. So this really costs about $1,000. I think the retail price is like $795 if you're not buying it with a contract, and then all your taxes and fees and so forth and so on. And of course, this or a high-end Android phone is now sold in the, hundreds of millions, right, around the world. So $200 is sort of an artificial cost, an amortized kind of, I feel like I'm paying $200 for this thing, but I'm really not paying $200 for this thing. I'm paying about $1,000 for this thing, or a couple of $1,000 amortized over the 9 months to a year that I'm going to keep it and then migrate to the next one. So I don't think when you look at a HoloLens, which is an announced price point of $3,000, what's the current ODG price point, sort of in that same range?
$2,750.
$2,700, right? So that's not that far afield from what this actually costs a consumer to buy. So I think that chasm of thinking, oh, well, it's going to be really hard to get people to adopt these things because they're going to cost like a couple of grand. When it comes down just a notch, so let's say it's, a little under $2,000, and it gets amortized or it gets locked into some sort of phone contract, if that becomes part of its use case, then I think you'll see a mass explosion. People will buy these things, and then it's up to us to figure out, do we have enough content to make sure we can deliver to those things?
And when I
they
do
go
the
buy them.
sales, to your point, it's not the hardware cost that stops them. What stops them is when they realize how much it would cost to build the content.
Right.
Then they're like, oh, well, we don't want to do that quite yet.
So we're bumping up on our scheduled time, but two things. I got a couple of things I'd like to go over. I don't think there's another session coming in here immediately at 2 o'clock, and I'd like to leave room for questions because I suspect there's a few out there. So everybody okay if we go a few minutes over 2? Yeah, sure, everybody. That wasn't a poll, by the way, and it was more rhetorical. We're going to do it anyway. Pardon me? 2:15. Okay, we'll get a couple of quick things done. We'll go to Q&A. Chris mentioned expectations, and that always reminds me of the Gartner hype cycle. How many people here are, this is a poll, how many people are aware of the Gartner hype cycle? Not very many. It happens with almost every key technology product out there. I'm going to tell you what the steps are in that cycle, and we'll ask our elite group here to kind of talk about it. It always starts with a technology trigger. Then the next step up is the peak of inflated expectations. Managing expectations. It's happened with 3D, happens with CGI, happens with lots of products. And then it hits down to the trough of disillusionment. Companies fall by the wayside when that happens. Everybody thinks it's going to happen sooner than it does. It's always the case. Moving on to a slope of enlightenment, and at some point on to maturity and the plateau of productivity. So those are the key things. If you Google Gartner Hype Cycle, you'll see what the curve actually looks like, and you'll actually see a curve that shows all the different technologies that are kind of on the horizon today, from early stage to more mature, and you'll see where Gartner places those on it. You probably have a similar, you use the Gartner Hype Cycle too then, probably, right? So where are we today with VR and AR on the Hype Cycle? Are we still moving up to expectations? Is that a unanimous?
No, I mean, I have seen the hype cycle for this, so I think, and when you take the poll, people knowing what VR is, I think what Gartner is saying that people are enlightened. I just think that we have to deliver on the promise now. So, people have already started falling by the wayside. People have already started changing their business models. And so I think, and there are great experiences out there, as Ted alluded to. So it's just now getting into the mainstream, and the fact that PlayStation was able to ship, in the hundreds of thousands, as they're quoting it, and we know a little bit more information. But, it's a real thing, and content is being delivered for it, both on the game side, interactive experiences, and then kind of even the lean back experiences. So I think it's definitely kind of that slope of enlightenment.
The only slight sort of difference on that hype cycle that I would kind of reflect on is that the area of disillusionment, or the trough of death, as we like to call it, is actually shortening and tightening now. Whereas in the tablet world, in the PC world, that was a pretty large gap to move from early adopter down to, I'm not quite sure why the masses would use this, to everything started to line up, all the stars aligned, and suddenly everything was right again, and people started buying these things in drove because human behavior changed, right? So I tend to do a lot of talk about this. As a technology guy, I talk more about human behavior and human instinct more than pure technology, which is part of this whole cinema discussion as well, is as the human factor, we become more robotic and more hybridized as we are all kind of connected into technology, that gap of disillusionment gets shorter and shorter and shorter because we're already ready for it. There's the gap of humanity using the tech is not as big as it used to be. And that's kind of what I see is happening with VR and AR this time around.
Let me just add one quick thing. I actually ran into Michael Yang from Comcast Ventures at Oculus Connect a couple weeks ago, and he basically said, congratulations on raising a round. You raised $25 billion. There are only going to be 6 companies that are able to do that, at least in this kind of this growth phase, and we're one of the 6 because, again, as Ted has suggested, things have accelerated. So now Fox is actually really investing, and they have a large platform already to distribute, and so does Disney. And so, it's the startups, are kind of going to be frozen out because the people that have been doing it for so well and for so long, and do have really incredibly high budgets on the motion picture and television side, are going to be able to bring those resources to bear on VR and AR content.
I think it's typically the case in these technologies where the small companies, small ideas either go by the wayside because they're undercapitalized, under management, they don't have the broad base of management they need, or they get consolidated. Anybody else on the Gartner?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more applicable in this sense to the business side, or to the actual companies in the space itself. And I mentioned earlier in terms of how content at this point is getting funded, and places like VRC have raised enough capital to sustain a decrease in dollars flowing in from brands, advertisers, and companies that are just willing see, we should do something in virtual reality, and let's spend $1 million or a couple $1 million or whatever that is on producing some sort of product. But when those returns come in, and if those returns aren't justifiable, or if there's something that's more attractive to be spent on from that brand advertising point of view, then those dollars go away pretty quickly, and the companies that are reliant on those will have a very, very hard time sustaining themselves unless, one, they've raised enough capital to sustain that and manage their way through that until the monetization side of it is equipped, or they won't.
All right, let's go with a few questions. Q from you, A from us. This lady right here, you just raised her hand. Go ahead.
I was at Oculus as well, and I saw Zuck say that he's put $250 million into content, and he's about to put another $250 million in, which seemed like to me, if you're betting on the future of your company and the future of the industry on gestural computing, and your social network is going to play there, your content is going to drive these things. When you're looking at Netflix putting $6 billion in, Comcast putting $11 billion in. That worried me when I heard that. And what I am curious about, though, from the content side, is when we look at Sony, and Sony's got its own headset, how about the other players in content? I mean, are you guys going to have to start actually creating your own devices?
One, I cover Facebook, and it's funny, just tale of two perspectives here. When they said that the 500 in total, I thought that was a big number because they spend about just under $5 billion in total R&D. So this is effectively 10%, and they don't have any revenue from it. So as we think about how these companies invest, this is more aggressive. I understand the absolute number might not compare to some of those other numbers, but as far as large tech, we felt that they made a statement about it longer term.
All right, a question back there. Go ahead.
While I agree with the panel in the notion that the dollars and the technology and experience that Hollywood or VR give a certain amount of distance, I think that creatives who are working at the lower end budgets are not really kicked out of the marketplace in that if you look at come from music and film, $100,000 Lightwave was easily replaced by a $5,000 emulator, a $14,000 sonic sampler. And I'm just giving an example of the tools and the storytelling skills put into independent content creators, I believe, will come about in the whole VR app market space. And then it's really about engaging content that really connects with the consumer space and the idea of infrastructure and access to experience that larger companies have. I think that is going to, at the end of the day, it's going to continue to get better storytelling because the consumer can be reached a variety of ways.
I actually agree with that, and not only that, but I think there are different niches that can be addressed, and companies can be created from that. And I wasn't trying to, I'm not sure if you were referring to my point, but I wasn't trying to suggest that only the studios in those 6 that have raised money will be successful.
Somebody else brought it earlier in the week.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly that there are stories to be defined and mechanisms to be discovered and niches to be conquered. That there will be a lot of great content creators and companies that are created in its marketplace. But I think it really requires focus.
Yeah, I don't see creativity limited by budget in any stretch of the imagination in this medium, or truthfully any modern medium anymore. Use YouTube as the ultimate reflecting point on lack of budget and fascinating creativity and viral connectivity. I think VR is going to push that even further, and we're already seeing great stuff with micro budgets being done, and a lot of indie developers. And because these tools, the game engines are ubiquitous, and they're often free for a young developer to use, and then they pay a success fee on that if they have a hit. They don't have to pay up front to use those tools. You're creating a very vibrant kind of young audience. The other part of your question on the headsets and the question about Sony building their own headset. What I do is I look very much into the future of what headsets should be and need to be and will continue to be evolving into. We mentioned that we have a partnership with ODG that we're working with. We're also very, very close with Magic Leap. We're very close with all the 3 main tethered headset manufacturers and a number of other entrants into the market in mobile. We care about this a lot. We care about the fact that if the image quality as it stands now holds for too long, the market will likely stagnate, and it will literally be relegated to certain types of experiences that are just better tuned for a lower fidelity headset that has some degree of pixelization. We believe very strongly that has to move forward. And everybody building a headset, by the way, that have things in the current market, believe that as well. So we are putting our money and our, I guess would you say, talent and skills where our mouth is there, and want the industry at large to know that we are not satisfied with where it sits today, that it's a great start. What we're doing is remarkable. What we're doing is getting a very wide swath of customers to be able to touch things and learn about things, but it has to increase by leaps and bounds to cross the chasm into mass adoption.
All right, I'm getting the signal that we've got to wind up. Please join me in thanking the panel for a great job today. And they did stream this, so the link will probably be available in the next week or so. I'll post it on my Twitter account, @MartySchindler, when it's ready, so follow me if you like, please.